Good afternoon. I'm Greg Niemeyer. I'm the director of the Center for New Media at UC Berkeley, and I'm really thrilled to be the introducer today for Brenda Romero. But before I introduce her, I have to welcome our web viewers, and I have to say that everything in the lunch that you're not eating, including the plate, is compostable except the tin foil. So please put it in a compostable bin and recycle the tin foil and make little paper hats, tin foil hats out of it or something like that. And I also wanted to mention an upcoming event, which is very exciting. The Center for New Media is hosting a conference on robots and new media on April 4th in this very room, and we hope to see you there again from 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. And we're very excited about it. It's led by Professor Eric Paulus, and it's going to have speakers like Hubert Dreyfus and Deidre Mulligan and many others speaking about the future of robots in terms of media and in terms of legal rights and in terms of ethics. It's going to be a very challenging and exciting debate. But now I would like to point out to you that behind me on the screen you see what a game looked like in 1981. It's hard to believe. It looks like it's work or something, but actually it's a game, and it's a wizardry, and it's one of the games that Brenda started working on in her early career. And she's been developing games since 1981 and has 22 titles to her name that she developed with various companies. And I heard her speak not too long ago in Asilomar, and she was incredibly inspiring. And so I was so inspired and grateful for the last talk she gave that I decided, instead of spending a lot of time figuring out what to say at the introduction, I'm going to go into her Wikipedia page and edit it. And there's a few things that were not quite right, and I updated that, so I passed that energy back to you. One of the things that the Wikipedia page says is that you're a graduate of Clarkson University in Potsdam, New York, which is true, and that you worked in the game industry since 1981, which we already said, and that Wizardry was one of your first titles that you worked on. What I find fascinating is that you bridge that space between role-playing games and social media. In a way, when we do social media now, we're all role-playing, and we're all taking on certain kinds of social roles and performing in certain ways. And then, of course, Brenda Romero came into the space with the game experience and developed a whole host of interesting games for the something's happening there on the okay, it's getting ready there, good. Developed a whole bunch of interesting games for the social media experience that expanded role playing into a gameplay in the social media space. What's exciting to me is that in 2013, on January 1st, she joined UC Santa Cruz as the very first game designer in residence. And she has since served as the director of the graduate program, the Center of Games and Playable Media, and has made a tremendous impact over there. And I hope that all of you who are students here right now, undergrads, will go there and get your game design title from that fabulous program. Brenda also is an author and has written a very compelling book about sex in video games, and she has she's gone to that subject with a lot of courage and a lot of empathy and a lot of open-mindedness, and brought a really good discussion to the table about how we should not control content through regulation, but rather through judgment, and through parental judgment in particular. And I think that's a really bold and important stand, and I'd like to, without further ado, allow Brenda Romero to speak to you directly. So please help me in welcoming Brenda Romero. So now we can switch.
Okay. I'm going to try to live up to that introduction. Is my mic on?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, I project and yell anyway, I guess. I have 4 kids at home, so I'm very good at doing that. It's interesting talking about censorship. One of my biggest, I guess foe isn't the right word, but one of the people with whom I found myself at battle often, both in the press and at game conferences and at other conferences, was Leland Yee, who seems to be living a real-life version of GTA San Andreas right now. So it's pretty ironic, too, because I think his heart was in the right place, at least in terms of protecting kids, but there was obviously some kind of very bizarre double life going on there. Anyway, enough about him. I've dealt with him enough, and I'm sure that the last thing he needs is me piling onto that. So, as you said, my name's Brenda Romero, and I'm first and foremost a game designer. I was lucky enough to be hired by UC Santa Cruz as a game designer in residence, which is easily the coolest title I've ever had. It's amazing that the University of California will even allow such a position. I later moved out of that role, and I'm now the program director at the Masters in Games and Playable Media program. Haha, it wasn't on. Okay, sorry, live bug fixing on stages. So this is where I teach now. I'm up in Santa Clara, and I run the Masters program along with my husband, John Romero. It's funny how I instantly recognize the sounds in that program. And I got my start in the industry, a very loose, kind of messy start in 1981. I started working for Surtex Software. And how I got in, I'm often asked how I got into the game industry. And how I got in is the lamest start story possibly ever. I was in a bathroom smoking a cigarette. Why the hell were you in a bathroom smoking a cigarette? Because I grew up in northern New York, which is under 25 feet of snow, and I was 15 and I was a bad kid there. So now I'm in the bathroom smoking a cigarette, and somebody came up to me and they said, well, not me, they came up to several people and they asked, do you have a cigarette? Do you have a cigarette? And I could tell they wanted a menthol. I'm not advocating smoking. Smoking's a horrible idea. Please don't do it. I've quit way long ago. Anyway, so this person, I eventually see she's looking for a menthol, and I say, or non-menthol. Are you looking for a non-menthol? Yes, she says. And to be polite, she strikes up conversation, and her conversation is, do you have a job? No. Have you ever heard of Surtec? No. Have you ever heard of Wizardry? No. Have you ever heard of D&D? Yes, I had, and I played. And I love D&D, and so that single question was the end of my interview and how I got into the game industry. I showed up at her house the following Tuesday, which was October 6th, and then I basically spent the remainder of that year learning everything there was to know about a game and getting paid for it. And then I actually started working on the games in 1982. And so there's the game that you've just seen. And since that time, I've worked on a whole ton of games. I mean, I actually was lucky enough to get to work on a real D&D title. I worked on all the games in the Wizardry series. And one of the things that I love the most about the Wizardry series, I can't claim even remotely anything close to having been at the beginning, the genesis, the design of that series. But I'm really proud to have worked on something that ultimately led to CRPGs. JRPGs, rather, the games that we traditionally think of, the Japanese role-playing games. It was Wizardry that inspired the people over there to create those. So, as you can see, I got into this when I was 15, so the core of my life is games. It's pretty much all I do. I'm married to a game designer. My husband he's been making games also since he was 11 years old. Like most 14-year-old kids, he learned how to program in assembly language and was working for the Air Force. I don't even understand how he learned assembly at the age of 14, but he did. He was trying to code in assembly at the age of 11, but he couldn't find the right book. So he later went on to create violence in video games, basically with Wolfenstein 3D and Doom and Quake, although he's really a nice guy. And anyway, so our whole life is games, more or less. We teach it, we make them, we talk about them, and it is what we do. And so when we think about games are largely these, obviously they're very fun things, right? But every single game has a core. And I want to talk a little bit about what the core of games are, what they mean, how they're created, and what they mean to me now through the context of some of my current work. And so when we're thinking about games, a lot of times we think about games like those that my husband and his team at id Software created, the first-person shooters, the super big-budget games that cost, nowadays, anywhere in the neighborhood of I would say mid-20s to sometimes games, especially MMOs, can go in the hundreds of millions of dollars. They're incredibly expensive productions. Or maybe it's something lighter, like a casual web-based game. This is a Facebook game that we worked on. It's no longer available. And then we have stuff, and it's interesting. I included this slide in a TED Talk, and I regretted it ever since because I refer to them as tragically boring board games. That is a tragically boring board game. Settlers of Catan, Pandemic, the Euro games that come out of Germany, brilliant, wonderful. They make me very happy. Those are good games. The ones where my poor daughter says, "Mommy, can we play Candyland?" God, what did I do? What did I do? Am I a bad mommy? Can we play something more interesting? So I love board games, and I think board games are amazing. But often I feel our culture doesn't have the best history in terms of producing really compelling board games that engage the entire family. They're more social spaces where 4 people come and play, and we go around a few times, and then we already know who the winner is. And games have recently started to become really fun even in our living rooms with things like, it starts with the Wii, but we get to connect, and people are up and moving, and they're doing things with games. In New York City, they have the Come Out and Play Festival. There's entire events sponsored around or centered around people coming outside and playing games with one another. So games are really a huge part of our culture. And generally when we think of games, we think of fun. And all games, as I've already mentioned, all games need a core. And it is the one thing, that single thing, a core is the single thing that game is about. Now, I've worked on games. I've worked on bad games that have multi-cores. So what is, if your game is going to be about, actually, just let me, I've already said it. It's the one thing the game is going to be about. Is it about survival? Is it about becoming the greatest magazine publisher in the world? There's a game about that. Is it about becoming, running a successful household? There's a game about that. Is it about having a successful career? Is it about running a successful zoo? If you can think of it, odds are somebody's made a game about it. And if they haven't, you probably should. Or maybe there's a reason that they haven't, actually, come to think of it. And with a core, we always have a core loop. So, this is the core loop of the Ghost Recon game that I worked on. You prepare the team, you choose your mission, you attempt your mission, you succeed and fail, you get rewards, you improve your base camp or ghost, and then you prepare the team and you keep doing it again and again and again. It's an upward spiral where everything feeds back onto itself. A lot of times, one of the most dangerous moments in games is when people say something like, it'd be really cool. Well, yeah, it would be. But will it work for the core? Does it make the core of the game stronger? An example from a pretty well-known game, Wolfenstein 3D, which was one of the earliest first-person shooters, largely given credit for it, but there's actually one before that. Wolfenstein 3D had completely coded, tested, all working, so there's no reason to yank it out of the game just in terms of time, because it's actually going to take time to get rid of it. It had completely tested and working in there the ability to stop and loot bodies and to take stuff from them. But the team at id Software took that out of the game because the core of that game was visceral survival and speed. They wanted that feeling more than they wanted anything else. And so when you had to stop and loot bodies, it just totally changed that overall feel of the game. When we take a look at something in a lot of survival games, just to take that one example I gave you with Ghost Recon and go pull it out a bit to make it more generic, you fight. What do you fight for? So I can get rewards. Well, what are you going to do with those rewards? I'm going to improve my guy. Why? So I can fight. And it just keeps going around and around and around. If you take a look at Mario, it seems like probably most of us in this room have spent a lot of time doing this. What am I doing? What are you doing? Well, I'm getting coins. Why? So I can get an extra life. Why? So I can get more coins. Just so I can keep playing. This endless loop that goes on and on and on. And that's what games are about. Some have been criticized, and rightly so, for being nothing more than Skinner boxes. This is particularly with the social games, where there's this forced friction. You get, 25 moves, and then you have to wait 8 hours for that. But they put kind of ridiculous pressure. Probably the worst one I've seen is this poor little lamb is lost. A window pops up. You're out of energy. There's really nothing else you can do. A poor little lamb is lost. What will you do? Save the lamb, let it die. Right? Like this. These are real. I didn't do that. I'm innocent from that. But seeing stuff like that, people creating games that are like Skinner boxes and that are like these compulsion loops that are very much like gambling, I'm not such a huge fan of those. And I'm hopeful that type of gaming will be in its waning days. So these are some common core dynamics that we see in games and some examples. Pretty much, this is a huge one. When we come to board games, territorial acquisition, who can get the most? These type of core dynamics are more or less what you see in games. I'm sure there are others out there, but these are the big ones. And sometimes when I'm thinking about designing a game, I'll actually look at one of these and think, okay, what do I want to do? And a game doesn't need to have just one core dynamic, right? You can have multiple core dynamics. In Risk, you could be trading things, and you can be you are theoretically racing to the end, trying to get domination. You can be collecting different things. You could be building up forces. So there's lots of different things that are happening in a game. But ultimately, it has one core, and that core, in the case of Risk, is basically to eliminate all your opponents. Every feature in the game needs to tie into that and make that core stronger. As a game designer, if it doesn't, it's your responsibility to nuke it. Now, what's interesting to me, but kind of in a darker way, I'm going to talk about this some, is that these common core dynamics also work for something that you wouldn't think we'd make a game about. There are things like, for instance, you wouldn't think, well, why the hell would you make a game about genocide? That's horrible. And part of the reason is for me, and I'm going to talk about this a little later on, one of the things that I love the most about games, it's all I've ever done. So I don't know how to express myself through another medium. when I went through a really difficult period in my life after a couple of significant events, I found myself trying to understand things in the context of systems. Because if you present me with a problem, I will only be able to really view it in a systemic way. Because as a game designer, getting into the game industry when I'm 15, my brain wasn't even fully formed, for goodness sake. And so this is how I tend to see things. I tend to see things architected as systems. And when those systems all move together, something happens. Games, to me, like every other form of media, are a way to help people understand things. And yet, when we take a look at every other form of media, we have books, art, music, we could go on and on. They, for some reason, tackle these deeper subjects. If I ask you to think of a famous photograph, something that you can just literally think for a moment about a famous photograph. And what pops into your head, I'm willing to bet that over half of the audience has something that's not pleasant. Because photographs have the ability to capture and express difficult emotion, and so do games. And that's an area that I decided to explore. So ultimately, at its core, a game is a system. That loop that I showed you, it's moving upon itself. How does the player collect loot? How does the player use loot? How does the player get the loot from enemies? Every one of these things is a system, and all those systems move together to create a core and to create a game. And ultimately, games can be, because of these systems in the real world, games can be something more. So I don't know if you guys, how many of you were around or aware of what was happening when the United States beat Russia in the 1980 World Olympics? Yeah, it was a religious moment isn't the right term, though the next slide is about a religious moment in games. I remember my mother starting to cry, because it was amazing that this had actually happened. I was still pretty young, and I wasn't aware of just how big a deal this was. But this was a country-changing moment. Now, much later on, I happened to be living in Massachusetts when the religious event occurred. And this is when the Red Sox won the World Series after 425 years. It was amazing because every single night the game seemed to go on till midnight, and attendance was dropping in schools, but that was okay because the Red Sox were winning. I mean, if it's educate your child or watch the Red Sox, there's no contest. And I remember going into a restroom in this office complex where I worked and closing the door, and it said, "Go Sox." And it was everywhere. You would walk outside at midnight, and the lights were on everywhere because nobody was going to go to bed because the Red Sox might win. And when they did win, people were outside crying, letting off fireworks. It was just amazing. And having grown up, and never would have admitted that I was a Yankees fan because I would have been killed, I found myself rooting for the Red Sox. It was an amazing moment. And now understand that this is a game. Baseball is just a game. But try telling that to anybody who was crying that night that won the World Series, that it was just a game, because it's so much more than that. If you remember when Kasparov and Deep Blue went head-to-head on multiple occasions, it was a game, it's just chess, but it was so much more than a game. It was a triumph of human engineering, and it was, I guess in some cases crushing to Kasparov, but it was just amazing to see. It showed us what computers could do. So previously in my career as an educator, I was the chair of a game department at another school. And as part of the chair of a game department, one of my jobs was to eat. And I did that very well. And I went to dinner with this guy called Zig Jackson. And Zig is a photographer. He's also a professor there. And Zig happens to be a tribe member and one of the members of First Nation, and he takes all kinds of great pictures. And what I really liked, he has this sign, and this sign is portable, and he'll just go stick it in places that obviously they're not actually, as he has here, Indian reservations, but he'll just go and stick it in places and take photographs of himself. And his work really inspired me. This is one of his pieces. It's a more traditional piece showing a rain dance. And this is one of his pieces, which is also a beautiful photograph, but it's very, very troubling, right? So just what I mentioned earlier, thinking about games and photographs, this piece troubles me in a sense because this is from his degradation series. So notice this guy has got his kids and they're posed with this Native American fellow dressed in traditional garb. Just for a minute, let's just race swap, shall we? I want you to imagine that this guy here is black, right? And now I want you to imagine me and my family going, honey, come here, let's take our picture with the black guy. Right? You'd be like, what? What are you doing? Are you insane? You can't do that. Why can we do this? Like, why is that okay? Why It's not, right? And it really got me thinking. The works that he was creating, he has this one piece, and I may be messing up the title of it, but it's called, I think it's called Indian Taking Photos of White People Taking Photos of Indians. Anyway, his work is really great. I encourage you to look into it. And so I was at this particular dinner, and he was talking about, Zig was talking about a shooting which had happened on a reservation. And he went to that reservation, presumably hoping to take pictures. And when he got there, he found he just couldn't. There was something about it, and he couldn't do it, and he made the decision not to do that. And so he was talking with this other photographer, and the topic of the conversation turned to, do you take the photo or not? When there are those moments, and we've probably seen it on YouTube, where somebody's getting the hell beaten out of them, but somebody's there with a camera because that's their job. Now, at some point in time, they've got to lower that camera. At some point in time, they have to recognize that Buddy's going to die if I keep filming. Do I film the death, or do I save my friend's life? And hopefully you've got a friend who's on the save my friend's life side. But it occurred to me as I'm listening to this, we never ask that question. Games never ask the question, do you make the game or not? Do you make a game about genocide or not? Do you make a game about rape or not? Do you make a game about bad things that could happen? Every other medium doesn't say, I don't know if we should make a game about something that's sad or something that's difficult. Books never ask that. Well, no, that's not true. Books do ask that question, but it's such a small, narrow piece. In games, it's, is it fun? Is it going to be commercial? And there are rare exceptions where something is fun and commercial and wrapped in a metaphor. Definitely my most favorite example is Vander Caballero's game called Papa and Yo. It is a metaphor about his life growing up. His life growing up is somebody who is not white and blue-eyed and watching white and blue-eyed American TV with his alcoholic father who would later be murdered. And it's about growing up as a kid. And it's a beautiful, now just having told you that, I probably haven't sold you on the game. But it's a beautiful game. It is an absolute masterwork in game design. And there's many other games that we're seeing nowadays that are coming out that are also dealing with more difficult subjects. In the game industry, we have something called the Independent Games Festival, and a game called Papers, Please, which is about the life of somebody who manages borders and how difficult their job is, the decisions they have to make, putting you into their footsteps. Or into their shoes, rather. So I started thinking about this at that dinner. Now, mind you, when I left the dinner, I would love to tell you that I went home and I thought, you know what, I'm going to tackle some difficult subjects. But I didn't. I went back to being a commercial game maker because I was in a box that I didn't even know I was in. And so that's going to change in a couple years. My daughter, this is a picture of her at the time. She comes home from school and she says to me, I say the same thing to her I do every single day. How was school today, honey? And she says to me, we talked about the Middle Passage. And I think, so when she says this to me, when she says she talked about the Middle Passage, her dad is half Irish, half black. And I thought, okay, I wasn't expecting this conversation at 7. I don't know why, I just wasn't. It was Black History Month in school. But nonetheless, I wasn't really expecting it. And so I stopped what I was doing and I wanted to know, how did you feel about that? How did you feel about the Middle Passage? And so she describes it to me, and her teacher would have been so proud of her because she had all the right bingo buzzwords. So the bingo buzzwords were as follows. So some ships came down from England and they went over to Africa. And in Africa, they collected the slaves, and then they went across the ocean to the United States. That's the Middle Passage, Mommy. And when they got to the United States, people were sold into slavery. But then Abraham Lincoln was elected president, and he passed the Emancipation Proclamation, and then all the slaves were freed. And then there's this pause. And then she says to me, can I play a game? I think, what? So there's the Middle Passage, but she had, as far as I'm concerned, so black people went on a cruise, is basically how she described it to me. And so I started thinking, can you play a game? And so I say yes. And because I'm a game designer, my house is loaded with prototype parts, as I'm sure your homes are too. If they're not, it's pretty fun to do something like this. Anyway, so I said to her, yes, you can play a game. And so on the spot, I gave her a bunch of those, and I asked her to paint them for me and to paint me families. I wanted to see some specific groups. So I want a mommy and a daddy and some kids. And so for about 40 minutes, she made me some families, and these are the families that she made. And so when they dried, we played the game, and I grabbed the boat. It's a boat to me, now it's a boat to you. So we grabbed the boat, and I randomly grabbed some people, and I put the people on the boat. And so Mesa starts saying things to me like, you forgot, like I hadn't grabbed everybody because it was a middle passage, right? And so she says to me, well, you forgot the blue baby. And I said, no, I didn't forget the blue baby. The blue baby can't go. And well, you forgot the pink mom. You haven't got all the families on the boat, because to her they were families. And I said, they can't go. And she said, but they want to go. And I said, honey, they don't want to go. It's the middle passage. It's not how it works. And so she's looking at me pretty much only as the child of a game designer would look at a mother saying, I don't think your game makes any sense. And so she does this, but we start going across the ocean, nonetheless. And so these are the rules. I made them up. I think, as you can tell, this game was made up on the spot. So it's going to take us 10 turns to complete the middle passage. We have 30 units of food. Each turn she has to roll a 6-sided die, and we use that amount of food. And we have to get across in 10 turns, mind you. So Mesa, unfortunately, is rolling high. And it looks like we're going to run out of food. And she says to me, I don't think we're going to make it. And so she doesn't really know what to do. So Mommy, what are we going to do? We're not going to have enough food. And so I said to her, remember, she's 7. So I said to her, well, we can do one of 2 things. We can try and keep going and hope no one gets sick. Or we can put some people in the water and keep going, and we'll have to use less food. And so she has this look come over her face, and she says to me, Mommy, did this really happen? Now, mind you, this is after a month of Black History, which just ignoring how ridiculous that notion is, right? After just a whole week concentrated on this, after things she's watched on TV, after movies, after books, after talks, did this really happen? And so then she starts asking all kinds of questions, and she starts saying to me, so Mommy, and this is her brother and her sister, also taken around the same time. So she starts asking me, so if I came out of the woods, Donovan and Avalon might not be there. Yes, they might not be there. But I would see them in America. Maybe, but we would get together? No, but if I did see them, then we could join up and we could be in the same family. Probably not. Well, what about Daddy? Daddy could come get us. No, Daddy wouldn't be able to come get you. And so she's asking all these questions, and she's really upset. And it's over the course of a game because she spent time. Now she spent time with these little wood figures. And painted them, and somehow they had become hers. And so these things had more meaning than just an envelope, just a pamphlet. With facts in it. Somehow something had become, through the abstraction, through the systemization, through seeing it move, it had somehow become real to her. So we have this whole discussion, and she's getting it, and her father walks in the door, clearly not expecting to come home to the middle passage, but that's what happened. And so we're having this big discussion, and it was amazing to me. I watched, lights go off. She was actually crying, her father was crying, I was crying, just because it seemed like such a magical moment, such a beautiful moment of understanding. And not necessarily a painful moment. Yes, what happened was absolutely horrible, but it's also a part of her history. And it was wonderful that she realized what had happened many years before. So I, on the spot, decide I've got to do this. I have to immediately do this again. So I made a game about where my people come from. Whoops, that was Paddy Donovan, the most Irish possible name I think you can get. Maybe O Paddy O'Donovan would take it one step further. So my family comes from County Cork in Ireland. And I'm I just won a Fulbright, and I'm going back to Ireland. I'm going to Ireland for the first time, and ironically, wonderfully, I'm going back the same way my ancestors got here, by boat. So anyway, this game was about my family's history. My family, it all starts, as with most Irish families, it starts around the famine. And so I made a game where the famine, a lot of stuff goes back to the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland. And depending on how you read it, and this also affects Barbadian history too, which is where my husband comes from, the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland, they come in from the north, and basically they say to the English, listen, English, we've got a fabulous idea for you. You hate the Irish, right? And the English say, yes, we can't stand the Irish. We hate them. What would you like to do with them? Well, if you give me some money, I'll get rid of the Irish problem for you. Sounds like a deal. Here's some money. So the English go over and they get rid of the Irish, and they say, hey, thank you so much for supporting our war effort. This is, by the way, for those of you watching at home, this is Brenda's abstracted version of history. There are volumes of books, but this is my very shortened version of this particular conflict. So Cromwell takes over, depending on the source you read, he takes over roughly 60%, between 40 and 60% of Ireland, and anywhere between 40,000 people and 120,000 people, depending on what source you read, are sent to Barbados as slaves. And so once they get to Barbados, not indentured servants, but as slaves. And this ended up resulting in, when they went to the English and they said, hey, English, so we've got your land for you. Thank you so much for supporting the war. They said, we absolutely hate the Irish. Just rent the land you took from the Irish back to them. And so this sets up all kinds of problems with the economy of the Irish population. So I decided to make a game about this, and my game that I made for Mesa was quick and on the spot, but I really, for the first time as a game designer, I wanted to focus on my core as a game designer, and the core of a game, minus programming, minus anything. I wanted to touch every part of it. So the color's not coming across too well in that shot, but I actually obsessed about little details, like the color green, and what color green is the right color for the Irish. So here you can see multiple versions of failed green. That's the green I ended up going with. It dried. When I painted them, it dried a really nice color. And then I started thinking about how I should represent the English, and I decided since they never came over, they would be represented as orange cubes. And this was a picture that I'm glad I took this shot, because I was just putting them in a box, and I was unaware that I was accidentally assembling the Irish flag, but so be it. So inside the game, now again, like the Cromwellian invasion of Ireland is not a happy chapter in any Irish person's history. And there's there's a saying that the reason that the grass is so green in Ireland is because of all the blood that spilled there of all the Irish people. And so I made, there's many of these, I made a bunch of Irish, there's families inside of each one of these wrapped in burlap. I left some of these in Southie, near Boston, and there's many inside the game itself. So this is me building the game, and I originally went to the store and, thinking about that core and everything tying back into it, everything needed to have meaning for me in making of these games. So this burlap is 99 cents a yard. It's the cheapest possible stuff. The game is, as we speak, falling apart. I mean, it's just not well constructed. But when I saw this beautiful earth, this beautiful fabric, I immediately thought of my mother saying in my head, can't we get it cheaper? Isn't there something we could get? Is there a way to get this cheaper? So that's why we got this. The game is more or less designed to fall apart. Each one of these is being held in by a single nail underneath it. They are wrapped with jute. The orange represents the counties in Northern Ireland. So that's part of the piece. Then the first time that knitting came in handy while being a game designer, I made some grass. I originally was going to put actual earth there, and a friend of mine suggested that is unreasonable to have a game which also needs to be watered. Knowing that game designers are probably the greatest plant killers ever, so I knitted a piece for each county in Ireland, and that's ultimately how the game looks. And I released it minus the heavy pixelization there, but I released the game in Boston. Which is one of the centers of Irish culture in the United States. So then I decided after I did two, I had to do 4 more. And I don't necessarily even know where the number 6 came from. I thought, and I've never since been able to find any source based on this, but Rainer Knizia is this amazing German board game designer, one of my favorites. And I heard that he worked on 6 games at a time often. And I thought, that's something I would like to try, to work on 6 games at a time. So I'd finished those 2, and I decided to make 4 more. And at this point in time, I'm not telling anybody about them. If any of you are writers, I see some people, a couple of you have taken photographs, and I'm sure every photograph you take, you're not intending to go out and be seen by the public. Right? Every letter you write, every song you sing. If you're a coder, I'm sure sometimes you're just messing around with algorithms to see if it's going to work. You're not intending for your stuff to end up on who knows, Reddit, to be torn apart and discussed. You're just not even thinking about that. And I wasn't thinking about that when these games were made either. And so I decided to do it 4 more times. It's going around this question. Can I capture and express difficult emotions with games? And so I start thinking, going back to that games are more and games have more possibility. And that a game core is ultimately that game system. And I start thinking, if I'm going to make games about difficult subjects, if I'm going to try that, if I can do that, it's easy to make a game about a not difficult subject. You want to make a game about shooting the hell out of aliens? It's been done a bazillion times. If you want to make a game about building, pick a profession, build it. It's probably been done, and it's been done on multiple platforms. And it's probably been done with aliens as well. So I start thinking, as a game designer, the challenge to me, something I want to take on intellectually, is can I actually make games about these systems? Can I explore something like that? And so the third game I made in the series, this is a game called Train. And Train is a game, and so it's interesting because in the rules I never refer to it as a game. But Train is a game that discusses complicity, and it's talking about complicity in the Holocaust. Will we blindly follow the rules, is the question it asks. Will we blindly follow the rules if we know where we're going? Will we blindly follow the rules even if we remove the rules from a Nazi typewriter? And I'm sad to say that sometimes the answer is yes. This game has been pretty extensively studied, and I don't know that I can say what the most recent, there's a researcher who recently came out, and it's fascinating to watch communities around it and how communities behave. Will people stand there and watch something happen even if they know it's wrong? When they know it's wrong, how will they react? So that's what Train was about. This is a game that I'm making right now. This is the game about the Trail of Tears. It is a 46,000 piece game. These are members of the Cherokee tribe. It's hand-painted. And yes, before you ask, do we have a crazy person speaking to us today? Yes, clearly. I can say now about 20,000, 25,000 pieces in, this is insane to do this. But I'm one of the things that I refuse to let this happen. I could easily, since I'm a professor, I could very easily say, hello, herd of graduate students. I need your assistance. Please come help me paint these 46,000 members of the 5 tribes. But that would be systematizing them. That would be doing, in my opinion, very much what the systems of the Indian Removal Act did to them. And I feel like this is the last time that they will be individually treated. Like, you are an individual. Who were you? And I love the idea that when people enter a space, they will see 46,000 people. Well, people, abstracted people. And every single one of those represents a person who is displaced from their home. And so that's the game that I'm currently working on. I'm also working on a game about day and night violence in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. And during the day, you play the people who are there just trying to survive. And at night, you play the games, and those people. The night you play members of the gangs, and those become your pawns. I had the people in the city become your pawns. I had a really interesting thing happen with one of the my prototypes. Now, there's a picture. I'll show you of a prototype that I'm doing. But my prototypes, they're not pretty. Right? I try to make my end pieces pretty, but my prototypes aren't pretty because, well, they're prototypes, and that's their job, is to not be pretty. And so with this particular game, there's a possibility. Let's say you're playing the game during the day, and you're trying to get enough food for your family, and you're trying to survive, and maybe you're trying to even go up a little in your life. Maybe you're trying to get out. And so you do this in the day, but now the day is done. And now it's the night game, and the night crew comes in, and it's 2 different groups of players who are playing this game. So the night crew comes in, and unfortunately, because now you're just a pawn, you're just a resource, you died. And the way to signal to the players during the day that you're dead is I will just paint it red. And we'll just have you paint it red. But what I didn't realize is that, what I realized later, especially once I started using the same dye myself, is that it left color on the person's hand. And so when that person came in and found that their person had been killed, they happened to notice the other student who had that color on their hand and accused them, like, you killed my character, you killed my person. And so I obviously, that's a pretty cool dynamic, which I'm keeping in the game. I was about to say, this shows you we're all full of tremendous flaws. I was not revealing, hello everybody, not revealing to them that it would dye their hands when they did this. There, I've just spoiled my own game. Well done, Brenda. Okay, so this is a game. This is actually not a game. This is a piece that I made called Preconception. And preconception is thinking about, I love the idea of exploring the possibility space around games. Like right now, let's just say, so right now we have every game represented before us ever. There's the canvases represent board sizes. There's a bucket there, and that bucket contains square pieces, so you could have a tiled world. So all possible world sizes, all possible colors. Is time a factor? So just think about, we have all possible games everywhere. Every single game we could ever make, we can make anything we want to make right now. And if I hand you a die, suddenly I've introduced luck into your game and minimized the role of skill. If I tell you you must use the colors blue and you must use the color red, well, maybe I've just introduced economy. Maybe I introduced sides. Right? So every choice we make as a game designer constrains our space further. And that's something I like to think about. This is a game, the next one that I'm working on, this is a game called Mexican Kitchen Workers. And where the name came from, I was in this restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, meeting with a client. And he happened to know the owner of the restaurant. And the owner of the restaurant, I have no idea still to this day why he did this, came out and interrupted our meal and said, "Oh, God, I'm so sick of something, complain. And I don't know what he said, because in what he said floated this amazing phrase to me. And the amazing phrase was this. So he says, take my Mexican kitchen workers. And there was something so interesting and preposterous and whatever it was, that phrase, I instantly decided I was going to make a game about that. And I have since spent a ridiculous amount of time researching Mexican culture, largely because I married into it. So I got lucky in that respect. But I've spent tons of time breaking into kitchens isn't the right term. But if I see the kitchen door there and the bathroom door there, I will walk into the kitchen door and say, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't. And inevitably, for a culture for whom food is absolutely at the core, if you ask a Mexican person to describe food, you can say, tell me some of your favorite things about food. I guarantee you will not make it through a paragraph without hearing their grandmother come up. It is a way of celebration. It is a way to mourn. It is a way to thank. It is a way for everything. And the way that food is so closely tied into the culture is very, very fascinating to me. And so I think it's interesting that there's all kinds of stuff in it, and the game is still evolving. This ultimately isn't going to be what the game is because I don't feel it is it's a mathematical problem. This game represented a mathematical problem. So basically, all the owners of these restaurants say, we're not going to hire illegal immigrants. We're not going to hire people who are not from this country. But if you don't, but if somebody does, mathematically, you will lose. Once one person decides to do that, the other four must do it, or they will fail. And so fabulous, great, it was a mathematical problem. It was just pure economy. But it didn't do anything to address the culture. It didn't do anything to actually ask deeper questions. So now I'm exploring a whole different version of the game, which does focus on Mexican culture and which focuses on the beauty that's contained within it. And so my current work, the stuff that I'm working on as well, these are 3 recent Facebook games that I've done, and it feels very weird, I will say, to go between these 2 worlds. One where there's something very weighty. The games, I should say, all the games that I showed you that are non-digital, other than being just ridiculous in scale, there's literally one of them. So there's not 12 copies of Train floating around. There's one, and I'm refused to sell it. The Irish game is presently in the National Museum of Play, where it will likely stay. Train goes in and out of various museums, and so I'm not going to sell them because I think that would be abhorrent to make a game about something that's that dark and then profit off of it. That just feels disgusting to me. So I'm currently working, this is what it's like working in the game industry. What are you working on? Can't say. So there's 4 different titles that I'm working on that I can't talk about. And it's true. Then I'm working, these I can talk about. This is Black Box. Black Box is a single player, 1-play game, and when I'm finished playing it, which I'm playing it right now, it'll be done, and it can't ever be played again, and then people can see the end state of the game. This is the game about the Trail of Tears, and that's Mexican kitchen workers over there. So those are all the games currently in production. Some of the things that I'm doing that I'm excited about, so at-risk youth, as a mother of 6 altogether, 4 still at home, all youth are at risk. My son probably right now is in danger of sliding down the hill behind our house. So all kids are in some sense, in some way, shape, or form, potentially at risk. But my husband and I like to work with kids. We get invited to speak at a lot of colleges. We get invited to speak at a lot of high schools. We will, on many occasions, say no, but if we're speaking at a high school in a traditionally underprivileged area, speaking at a high school with kids who may have grown up like us, like I grew up in a single-parent household and we had no money. John grew up in a single-parent household, which was also, he's talked about it publicly, his father had alcoholism, left the family at a very young age. And he struggled for quite a while. And so we like working with those kids. We like showing them that making games and code is a way up and out. So that's some of the stuff that we do. I also do a lot of stuff around women in games as well as girls in games, trying to get them into that as a career, seeing that it's amazingly, it's ridiculous. Honestly, it's ridiculous that I am paid not just to make games, but to just talk about having made games. I somehow feel that I got incredibly lucky in this life, and I don't take for granted even a single day that that's what I get to do. It's endlessly fascinating to me. A lot of times girls are pushed away from, I'm watching now, I have 2 young girls at home, a 13 and a 15-year-old, and I watch as the socialization. You don't want to play games? Come on, that's stupid. World of Warcraft is dumb. My 13-year-old is a level 90 in World of Warcraft. Right? She really is. And I think, like, no, it's not dumb. That's wonderful. In fact, why don't you learn how to code it? Right? Why don't you learn how to make it? And she is, right? So I do a lot of stuff that's trying to encourage young women to come into games, because I know when I got in the game industry, there were 5 women in the game industry, and I knew every one of them. This year, this may sound like the lamest, exciting announcement. This year, there was a line in the women's restroom at GDC, and we applauded. It was like, yes, we have to wait to pee, right? I mean, it's insane, but that's what it felt like. It was really exciting, and I love going to events where I see women who are game makers and I don't know them. Like, I don't actually recognize them. I don't know who they are or where they come from. That's exciting to me. So we're making pretty massive progress. And I talked about this a little bit. John and I are huge believers that no matter where you start in life, if you can get a computer and you can learn how to code, you can get up and out. I really feel like programming is the great liberator and is so important for kids to learn. I don't know, on Facebook at one point in time, there was an option like, what languages do you speak? My husband only speaks English. His father wouldn't let him learn Spanish because he thought it would. I mean, he called his son Alfonso Romero, and he looks Mexican, but he thought not speaking Spanish would be a good cover, I guess. And so John actually decided to fill in languages he knows, and instead of putting French, he put in 6502, and it just kept going up from there. Anyway, so for the future, I don't know what other stuff interests me. I'm obviously going to continue working on commercial games because I like that, and I like just creating things for fun and for play. I love watching the effect that Minecraft has had on people and the effect that Minecraft has had on kids. I'm amused by the fact that the combination of Civilization Revolution and FTL, which I just love both of those games. And if you haven't played either one of them and you have important things to do in your life, don't. because I probably played them more than I should. But I'm also always interested in working on other projects. It's neat to be at a point in my career where I don't care what the reviews are. What I care about is trying to make something as good as I can make it. And I'm also at a point that I don't necessarily care about, like, I'm never going to be a bazillionaire. I'm never even going to be a millionaire. I don't care. I care that I have enough money to survive and to allow me to do the things that I want to do, because that, I feel, is my life's core, and that's what's important to me. That's it. Thank you.
Okay. So, if you have any questions, please use the mic.
I'm obviously from Ireland. You can hear that. I'm disappointed to hear that you're not actually going to develop that game. It sounded to me like the purpose served by developing it would actually outweigh any possible moral ambiguity about it. So if I may just continue just on this for a second. For example, I don't think anybody else here apart from myself had heard about the mass deportation of Irish to Barbados under Cromwell, or the fact that 1/3 of the population was killed under Cromwell,
Absolutely.
Which is documented by his own statistician. But I'm just wondering, have you thought of doing one about the famine?
So I when I was working on my master's thesis, yes, I have. And you know what? So that's interesting you say that. Sorry, everybody else, we're just going to have a conversation, me and this gentleman. So part of it, when I made these games originally, and I left this out of the talk, when I made the games originally, I wanted to just see if I could do it. I was never intending to release them or talk about them. I had a friend, there's an annual gathering of there's conferences, and there was an annual gathering of game developers. And as you saw, I have the wall of non-disclosure agreement. I can't talk about what I'm working on, and neither can any other game developer. So as the topic's going around, what are you working on? Can't say. Oh, well, I'm making a series of board games. And so when Steve Moretsky happened to be the game designer, and he said to me, well, so what are you going to do with them? And I said, I'm not going to do anything with them. And he said, well, you have to talk about it. And I said, I don't want to talk about it. And he said, well, you have to. Promise me. So this group of board game designers, like bullies, says you've got to talk about it. So I agree. And because I'm a game designer, that means I operate by rules. And now having made a promise, I don't know what I think I'm going to lose my game developer card if I don't do it. But I do it. I speak at this very small conference about these games called the Triangle. It's bigger now, but it was a room of 25 people, if even, about these games. And what I didn't know, so I'm talking about these systems dealing with the Holocaust, slavery, Cromwellian invasion of Ireland. That's what was done at the time. And unbeknownst to me, there was a Haitian Jew and his Irish wife in the audience. And somehow those 3 games, I'd hit everything. And so she started crying and left the room. And I thought, oh, God, because I'd never talked about these games in front of anybody but game designers. And she came back in when I was done talking, and she gave me a huge hug. And we talked for quite some time. I get really choked up when I think about it. And what I didn't know, during this time, there was a reporter in the back of the room, and that reporter wrote about it. And so once that article got out, well, now the games are accidentally released to the world. And that happened on April 20th, 2008, I think. So that said, so I wasn't ever making them for commercial distribution. And like the Irish game, and its actual name is Síochána Lot, so Gaelic, peace be with you. And inside there's my mother's rosary and my grandfather's picture, and basically all the things that I grew up knowing about Irish history. The rules, in fact, my grandfather used to say something that, if it's worth getting behind, it's worth writing in blood. And I took that literally. The rules are written in English ink and Irish blood. And so, like, literally, I poured everything I had into it. So it's impractical to reproduce that. That said, because I'm going to Ireland, so I'm giving you all that massive amount of stuff. Because and I grew up, like, I know so much about my family's history. I know so much about Irish American history. And going back, I'm thinking, I feel like I have to make a game while I'm in Ireland. I've written about the famine. I've written about it pretty extensively. I've studied it pretty extensively. And I think that would be the right game to make. I was debating making a game about Brian Boru, but I just don't feel like making a game about conflict, a war conflict. So I think I'll commit to making the game about the famine, and not making it a game I sell, but a game I would just give away. But yeah, thanks. That's perfect. That's what you're here for today. I appreciate you. That's amazing. Thank you.
Do you have a question?
So your non-commercial games, and this may be reflected in your commercial games, but your non-commercial games are obviously deeply personally meaningful to you, especially as you build the pieces and you pour so much effort into it. The players aren't going to have that same deep level of emotion or impact or feeling on the surface because they're not necessarily building the actual pieces. So how do you when you design, is part of your design process to increase that impact or that level of emotional investment for the other players? Do you feel like you just design for design and let them discover their own journey? And does this reflect in your commercial work too? Do you feel like you've put so much investment in this, say, some concept or some topic? Do you specifically design to try and highlight that, or does that make sense?
It does, yeah. So what I do in every one of the games that I create, whether it is commercial or one of these pieces, I'm always looking for how I want the player to feel. Always, what do I want them to feel? So in a commercial game, I may want them to feel excitement, fun. One could argue that there's no need to argue. Doom and Quake those aren't my games; those are my husband's games. It's about making people feel fear, feel like they're at the seat of their pants, right? So that's what those feelings are about. And with the Irish game, to use that as an example, it's the hopelessness. Like you're not going to stop Cromwell. So the stated rules of the game are who loses the least is the winner. And in fact, in board games, normally if you think of any game you've played, like the oldest goes first, the shortest goes first. In the Irish game, I actually removed that from the player, and the English go first. Because it was a hugely degrading thing that happened to the Irish people and set the stage for all kinds of bad stuff to follow. When I'm with the game about, thinking about researching the games, I spend a ton of time researching the games. When designing Train, I spoke to many, many people who were impacted by the Holocaust. I was asked, the most terrifying game design moment ever, I was asked to bring Train to a rabbi. And I passed through what my friends have since called the Jewish Gauntlet. My Jewish friends have called the Jewish Gauntlet, where this wonderful man asked me a question about every line of the rules, every piece on the board. Why is it the way it is? And then probably I would be shocked if this ever gets topped. He blessed the game and then blessed it as a work of Torah. There's no way that'll get any better. And how I researched it, other than just doing the research you would expect, I had to make it personal for me. And so there was this image of these two children, and they have the star, the yellow star pinned to them, and they're posed for a photograph, and they look happy. And the mother, and I thought about myself as their mother, and I spent anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours with them every day. And I don't mean doing the dishes and they're up there on the monitor. I mean sitting there thinking about them, thinking about what I might do today, what might the mother do today, if these were my kids, and really trying, as a mother, to connect with how that mother may have felt, and may have felt knowing that her kids were in all likelihood going to die. So I'm trying to capture that feeling in the system. And I find... So Train, the way it looks, if I can get back to it, the way, I try to put a lot of symbolism in my games. I've had people say things like, Train, you can't see it, but you can. This is crystal knocked. And throughout this game, these are boxcars that people are going into. Boxcars aren't passenger vehicles. The people are yellow. And Train actually isn't referring to these pieces. Train is referring to what happens to human beings, that we train ourselves to follow certain systems that are abhorrent. So Train isn't about the things you see on the board. It's about what rules and complicity can lead us to do. And I find, I've had people who do, Train is pretty well known among game designers at this point in time. So when people come to see the game, they already know about it. And they just may want to see it. The game, the rules for Train were typed on a Nazi typewriter, which is just abhorrent. I refuse to keep it in my house. And people sometimes just want to see it. They just I gave a talk, which is, I think it's online at UC Santa Cruz, about stories from Train. And I've been so fortunate when it's there. I've been so fortunate to hear so many different stories about people who have survived, people who didn't survive, listening to people learn about their culture. I've had moments where people say, where they take one of the cards and they say, what's Auschwitz? And had somebody go, what? And then tell them what it is. This isn't like hundreds of years ago, right? So I think it's important to even keep history alive through games. Another thing I was debating about going when I go to Ireland is through the penal codes, a lot of the Gaelic culture was crushed and forgotten, and much of it was reintroduced through the Gaelic games, not Gaelic video games. But I do think that there's potential for that. Like, what if Gaelic culture was also supported, its reintroduction was supported through Gaelic video games? And I think about things like that. That may be the most long-winded and possibly non-answer to your question ever. I'm hoping somewhere in there was an answer.
So I think we have time for one more question right now.
Thank you for your talk. I didn't anticipate that I would get choked up during your presentation, so thank you for that.
Oh, thanks.
Always a bonus. So the games you're presenting here, obviously change people on the inside. Me just hearing about them changed me on the inside, and perhaps that changes people's behavior. But I'm interested in games that directly motivate behavior change, particularly in the field of public health. I'm working with some epidemiologists in the School of Public Health here to see if we can create a game that will get young men who have sex with men, MSMs, to show up for repeat testing for prevention purposes and recruit their members of their social network and potentially sexual networks to come in for testing. And what I was thinking about while you were during your presentation is that, this is a human tragedy that's going on right now.
Yeah.
People have sort of forgotten about AIDS, but there are subpopulations where the infection rate is as high as it is in parts of sub-Saharan Africa, up to 30% African American men who have sex with men. Insane. And so the question is, how do you take the step? It's not just a game that, you come into the clinic, get tested, and play a board game, right? It's a game where your life, right? Now, the things you're doing in your life, getting tested or not getting tested, recruiting your friends, making contact with your friends, writing commitments, and enrolling your partners, your mother, your whatever, are scoring you points, and you're engaged in this game. How far can we push that? And by the way, I'm not only not a game designer, I'm like a behavioral economist, and I'm a professor in the School of Public Policy, and I know jack about games. But I am also stupid, so I believe that this can be done.
So I believe it can be done too. In fact, I'll even go one step higher than just games. In a lot of education and a lot of things that people are trying to educate younger people about. Games are seen as this antidote, right? Well, that if a kid, my daughter, will sit and become level 90 in WoW, if she will create her own guild, if she will, she learns all that math and all that stuff is functioning in her head, couldn't we also use the same game mechanics to make her think good about, or to influence positive change? Well, the answer is yes, but we also often end up with chocolate-covered broccoli, where you have somebody who wants to teach something, and they sort of put it in this format that's not entirely fun, or maybe it was an absolute blast in 1982, right? But it's not fun now. And so if a kid has their choice, I was using this example earlier, if the kid has the choice of shooting, instead of shooting asteroids, they're shooting pathogens, right? Or Angry Birds. Angry Birds is going to win. Minecraft's going to win, right? So the interesting thing is, how do you make that fun? How does that become interesting and fun? And also, how does it even become accessible? Because lots of people don't, one of the communities that John and I are working with right now, we went to speak there, and I couldn't believe the computers. I mean, I should be grateful there's computers at all, right? But I was really surprised by the age of computers, and this is like down the road from us. And so I'm even thinking one step further, is that how we could develop systemic thinking, because we view games as systems, right? So I'm not going to play a first-person shooter with my husband because he'll destroy me. So there's no point for me. I'm not even going to play the game because I already feel I've lost the game. And I wonder to what extent that thinking, or the lack of awareness about not engaging, they're not even aware they're engaging with a system, or they believe that the system's already lost for them. And actually trying to make people see things more as systems and how things move together. A lot of times people also, like if we, for instance, have, using that example of pathogens, if a lot of times like, you are the good scientist and your role here is to eradicate, whatever. This is a hand-washing game. That's not, nobody, there's no way I can get my kids, even with $20, okay, maybe $20, to play that game. But if I say, you're taking on the role of a piece of poop, they're already up and out of bed, right? Now, yes, we're in, we're poop, yes, right? And I know, so it sounds like my kids are, huh? Right, there, see? So, but that makes kids, that gets people, people like to do the abnormal behavior in games. Will Wright, who's local to this area, in The Sims, it has things like you can actually wall off your Sims. And if you wall them off long enough, they can't pee. Or they can't go to the bathroom, right? So they'll pee all over themselves. And there's all these divergent gameplay things that people like. And so, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't teach lessons. And so can it be done? Absolutely, yes. In fact, there was a poor attempt at it around 2005, 2006 to address the exact same audience that I'm aware of. I don't know what became of that, but I remember not thinking it was the best attempt. If you ever wanted to talk to me about it, I'd be glad to. Okay.
Well, thank you so much for your great talk.
I'll still be here.